Okay, having transferred your pencil outline to your watercolour paper, take your kneadable eraser and just remove the excess graphite from your drawing. I don't particularly like heavy pencil lines on mine. That's my choice. You may choose to leave the heavy pencil line depending on how well you see. First stage, I'm just going to do those tiny little florets in the middle. I'm not sure what they're called, but anyway, I'm using a warm yellow with a touch of blue in it, so it's a little bit yellowy, a very yellowy green. There's only 3 or 4 little bobbles in the centre, so just do those so they're done, finished, complete and out of the way. Drop in a little bit of darker green around the shadow areas where it's darkest, down in the centre of down in the throat of the things you need. It's like a shadow, so just on the tip of your brush, a tiny little dab. So dab it in, take your brush away, leave it to do its own thing. We don't really want to fiddle with that. So it's a very quick, simple dab, 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 done. So the only thing you might want to add is just a little more of that bright yellow to really on the highlighted stage. Now this is a painting that's done in stages. We are working on individual leaves and we are only working on one leaf or petal at a time. So I'm going to start, each petal will be wet in wet. So each petal is wet completely, just with clean water. And this is a great opportunity to see what your different reds that are in your palette, how they behave. Don't let that water touch the little bobbly things in the centre because it will run. So we're just touching the paint on, fairly thick paint, like it's got water added to the original paint, but not a watery mixture. It's a fairly strong mixture. When you're doing it like this, you take the paint, start where you want the thinnest lines, take it to where you want the heaviest amount of pigment, because where you stop the brush is where the pigment loads. So those little veins, if you like, just paint them towards the centre rather than towards the outer edge. And just get those little pointy bits on the end, tidy up the edges to get a nice shape on your petal. Now be in mind that this is just the first layer. We will come back and visit this petal after it's dried, so you don't have to overwork it, you don't have to paint everything. It's really nice to have light and shadow and water and different tonal textures going on, and you can take a little bit of alizarin crimson. This particular petal is in the dark a fair bit, so it will have a little bit of alizarin crimson. The only thing I don't like about alizarin crimson is that it tends to run very quickly, it spreads very quickly, and it dries rather flat. It's not really my favourite red, but it is quite handy if you want to get some nice deep shadowy colours happening in there. So this is not a slather over the whole thing. This is just using the tip of your brush, dropping it into the water, because you've got a fair bit of water on that petal, or you should have. It should still be very wet. So you're working in a puddle of water. And just go back to your reference and have a look at where the darkest sections are and where the lightest sections are, and try and replicate that. Now on that edge is a little bit of light, so I've just taken a small round brush, dip it in water, dry it onto a paper towel, and just suck out some of that pigment to get a bit of lightness on that upper edge, to really bring some light back to it. Now that pigment will spread into that area, as you can see it's doing already, and that will help. So now we leave that leaf alone completely. So we're moving to another leaf, which is well away from that one. We don't want these leaves touching each other. We're working on each leaf individually. So don't touch that first leaf again now. We have to just leave it now until it completely dries. Because this leaf is under and further towards the back of our flower, I've gone with alizarin crimson here. As you can see, it runs and spreads and as I said, dries rather flat, but we might put another layer on top of that to try and get some depth and interest into that. So just tidy up your edges. It has a on the dry edge, you got a good clean line, and in those little corners of the petals, really take note of that. It helps to have a brush that's got a nice little point on it like the one that I'm using, because you can get right into the corners. And you can go back in and add a little bit more alizarin crimson around the edge of that leaf to create the shadow, and just touch it. So load up your brush and just touch it to where you want the shadows. And if you're a bit like me and keep dipping your arm into the painting, you might want to flip your page over. We just wet the next leaf down. This leaf is well away from the first two leaves that we've done, and we want to keep it that way. This leaf is only a small leaf, so it's fairly quick and easy to do. And I think I did this one with alizarin crimson as well, because it's there's alizarin crimson coming on. You can see alizarin really takes off. It doesn't sit where you put it at all. It goes bang. I'm going to disperse in the water all the way. And again, we will come back and visit these petals later. Now, if you need to flip it around again, we've got another leaf that we can use, get there. And this one, I think, might be, again, just wetted. I think this one's a green leaf. So we can wet that whole leaf. And this technique, we're just repeating this technique throughout the whole process of wetting the area that we're working on with water, loaded clean water. Then we mix up our pigment. With this one, the green is a poinsettia have a fairly deep green leaf, but this one had a fair bit of yellow showing through it on this reference photo. A bit deficient in something, I'd say. But anyway, so green, as you know, is you can either use green out of your palette, or you mix your green out of a blue and a yellow. Now, if you're going to get a nice clean green, either mix 2 warms or 2 cools. If you mix a warm blue and a cool yellow, you'll get a fairly muddy green. So just take note of that. So try different blues and different yellows to find a green that you are pleased with. So our little bubbles in the middle, I don't know what they're called. We'll call them stamens, but I think they're actually the flower, and the red part is all leaf on poinsettias. So the flower are just those tiny little yellowy things in the centre, and the flower itself is nothing much. It's the leaves that are actually the interesting thing. So we're working on another leaf over there that's not touching any other leaves, and I'm sorry, I filmed this on my phone and it has chopped off a little bit of that one there, so I'll wait till it comes back in. Okay, so we're using quinacridone magenta or rose madder, one of those two in that one. Now that is really pink, and it's really pink and really different. But as I said, this layer you can try all your different reds and see where they go and see how they behave. You can just use them straight. You don't have to mix them in with anything for these red flowers, because the reds are quite lovely. Now that pink is really dramatically different, but we can come back and correct that when we do our next layer on top of this initial layer, after the petals are all dry. So don't worry too much about it now. We'll just continue on with this, working our petals that are not touching any other petal, or our red leaves that are not touching any other red leaves, as it really is. Now where to next? All the time you are keeping away. One of the things that you can help by doing this is practice patience And one of the things that I notice that a lot of people do when they're learning watercolour is they want to keep going back in and playing around with the paint and painting everything between the lines. But we don't want to do that. We want to let the water do the running. And as you can see with this magenta or rose madder, very similar colours, it is leaving some lovely highlights there and leaving some beautiful cast light, and we don't want to lose that. The petal that's just to the right of that, or the above it, our alizarin crimson petals, you can see that the alizarin crimson has this habit of just spreading right out, and it does go rather flat. It's as I said, not my favourite colour, but is quite useful because it's a cool red, and when you're using the reds, you need warm reds and cool reds. In this one, I've used Windsor red. May have used a bit of cadmium. I'm not a very big fan of cadmium red, but it may be in there. So Windsor red, alizarin crimson, and rose madder is the primary colours that I've used in this particular painting. This might be, I think this one might be a bit of cadmium red. Cadmium red's a lovely fire engine red, so it's a bit hard to find something that's equal to it, though it doesn't behave very well. It's a bit dull when it dries, apart from the fact that it's that beautiful fire engine red, which is very hard to get elsewhere. Now, watercolour always dries a shade lighter, so don't be afraid to have your pigment loaded when you're doing these stages. Because as it dries lighter, it's really hard to get the depth of colour if you don't have lots of pigment loaded up on it right in the beginning. So we might be able to do one more petal before we let this put it into dry. We can do this little tiny guy in the centre there, the little folded up leaf. And this one is supposed to be painted with water, but you can see by now my water needs cleaning, and it's just some Windsor red that I'm popping onto this little tiny petal, or little folded up petal. And I haven't worried too much about it because it's reasonably insignificant. It does have some nice alizarin shadow. Alizarin is your dark red. So it's got some nice little dark sections on it. So just pop those. So again, dip your brush into your alizarin crimson, and just on the point, just touch it and then leave it. Now you need to let this stage dry completely.